I think we'll just give you a little bit of an introduction to who we are and what we studied at the University of Chicago before we get into some questions that I've prepared with the help of the student committee. My name again, Alma Klein. I'm a creative director at ARC, Leo Burnett. Most people have heard of Leo Burnett. I actually work for the ARC arm, which is shopper and digital marketing, although we do a little bit of everything. I work on the Procter & Gamble account across all of the beauty brands, laundry care brands, and a few of the healthcare brands, and I work on account-specific work too for brands like retailers like Target, Walgreens, CVS, Kroger, Publix, and Amazon. And I have a very traditional creative background. 2 years out of college, I decided I wanted to be a copywriter, and I'd created a portfolio to get a job at an ad agency. I paid my dues going from copywriter to senior copywriter to associate creative director to creative director, and along the way had a family, so I have 2 girls who are in elementary school. And I've been at 2 big agencies. I started at an agency that's now called Geometry Global, which is owned by the WPP Group, and then I spent 8 years there, and I've been at Leo Burnett for 7 years, which is owned by Publicis.
My name's Katarina Steele. I graduated in '03, and I majored in music, so a lot of music theory for me. I am a strange bird in the world of advertising because I've only worked at one ad agency. People typically move around, but I've really just found a place that I love. I started out on the account side, spent about 5 years, again, paying my dues, starting out at the bottom and working my way up to be a main client contact as an account executive. And ultimately, I ended up moving into more of an internal-facing role, manager of new business development, which splits kind of, if you think of a way of marketing or selling our own ad agency, the business of an ad agency, and doing the market research to support that. So sort of a jack of all trades, and I've been doing that for about 5 years.
Hey, my name is Gabe Saposi. I was an '03 grad as well in English, and I did that for a couple years and then found something I was really passionate about, which was making video art. So after college, I decided to go to film school. And after film school, I decided that I wanted to try editing, and then I kind of dabbled in a lot of different little TV and film production type roles. From that, I started copywriting taglines for film and TV, and that's how I formed my first portfolio, which I then shopped around back in Chicago and got into a job at Leo Burnett as a copywriter. So I started my career as a copywriter. My career has, in the last 8 months, taken quite a left turn. I now work at Sapient, which is a global digital agency, and it's 13,000 people, quite large. Lots of those people in India, North America, Europe. And my job is now going from that kind of external client-facing creative role. I've moved to an internal role where I'm a culture strategist, meaning I look at culture as a strategic asset for our business. How does that align with our business goals? And how can we create the kind of culture that's going to make us the most collaborative teams and make the best work for our clients?
Hey everyone, I'm Michael Burin. I graduated '04 and I studied Econ and Latin American Studies. Right after college, I actually pursued nonprofit, but quickly decided that I wanted to work in business, and I got my first advertising job at an agency called FCB. Stayed there for about 6 years, loved it. I worked in what was called the customer intelligence discipline, but now it's called strategic analytics, essentially using data to develop consumer insight for creative campaigns as well as measurement on the back end. Worked across different categories, had the opportunity to work out of our office in São Paulo, Brazil, and really loved it. Then I got an opportunity to work on the client side. I worked at Miller Coors, where I worked in the marketing insights group, focusing on the Miller Lite and Coors Light brands, specifically on reaching different multicultural audiences. So I did some work on LGBT, Spanish language media, and then also some African American work. And then in July of last year, I decided that I wanted to try something new. So I switched from Miller Coors to a company called Undertone, where I'm currently at, and it's a media company that focuses on high impact ads in the desktop, digital, mobile space, and I focus on product innovation. So developing new brand interactions that can be sold into agencies and brands. And focusing on emerging technologies as well, like what beacon technology could mean for the retail space, as well as digital out of home. So that's it in a nutshell.
Good morning. My name is Ken Kabira. I want to thank all of you to come to this panel. Class of 85, so I'm sure can't even fathom somebody going to college back in 85. Probably most of you weren't even born. Pleasure to serve with this impressive panel. Listening to what they've done, clearly I've been chosen to be more of a warning to you than an example. My career has been almost entirely on the client side. When I graduated in 85, that day, I did not have a job. I completely screwed up getting a job. The career office back then probably had 1.5 full-time person. The college was a very different place. No such career day existed, and I had completely failed to nail a job down. So I turned my part-time job into a full-time job by necessity, and that was to serve as a Japanese-English translator. I'm also bilingual in Japanese. A lot of your life in the future, when you look back, you'll say, boy, that was lucky. And I found out that luck is when preparation meets opportunity. And I was very fortunate that in the mid-'80s is when the Japanese automotive industry started to make a lot of direct investment in the Midwest. So fortunately, I was able to land lots of clients and was able to make a living. And one of my clients was Inland Steel, a large steel company that was based here in Chicago. And the CFO and I really got along, and he invited me to join the company, and I ended up spending almost 10 years at the Inland Steel Company. Meanwhile, I got my MBA from Booth, which wasn't even called Booth back then. It was called GSB, Graduate School of Business. And through the GSB, I got increasingly interested in consumer marketing. And the steel industry was a very, very difficult industry at the time. In my 10 years at Inland, it went through 3 massive downsizing. It was kind of a depressing place to be. So I had a career change. I joined the Kellogg Company in Battle Creek, Michigan. And I spent another almost 8 years with the Kellogg Company. 5 of that I spent as a marketing director in their operation in Japan. Came back about 14 years ago to join the McDonald's Corporation, which brought me back to Chicago. I was promptly sent back to Japan as the chief marketing officer for McDonald's operation in Japan, which was and is the second largest operation outside of the United States, with about 4,000 restaurants, which was a lot of fun. Anybody who wants to go into the retail business, I would encourage you to do so, because it's a lot of fun. Since then, I've been a chief marketing officer at a private university here in Chicago. I've also been in government. I was recruited to be the very first, and to this day, the only chief marketing officer for the Chicago Transit Authority. Then I went over to the Lions Clubs International, which is a global humanitarian service organization. And I was there for 3 years. And after that, I started my own management and marketing consulting firm called TrueWorks. So that kind of sums it up.
So one of the things that I think we forget once we are enmeshed in the worlds of advertising and marketing is how it seems kind of like one big morass to a student who hasn't had a chance to work in an agency or work in a marketing department. And given the incredible amounts of different experiences on this panel, I thought it might be helpful if we give you some possibilities, because it is such a big world. I can speak to the creative path. It's really the only experience I've ever had. And a creative department usually consists of copywriters and art directors working for creative directors who either came up as a copywriter or as an art director. But that said, our creatives, we work with producers who make our ideas come to life. We work with account executives who interact with the client all day long, and we work with strategists who translate a brand's challenge into a creative challenge and give us the sandbox in which we play. But given that our panelists have worked, some of us in different fields, I thought maybe we'd just take a minute to outline some of the other paths that you might want to go to.
Sure. I know for me, when I first started, everyone in this room has an advantage over, certainly me, I don't know for you guys, I knew nothing about advertising. I didn't know the difference between advertising and marketing. And when you start to add in things like digital and client side and all the different jobs that we've talked about, don't feel intimidated if you're not quite sure what those are, because you have an opportunity to learn, and by being here, you're taking the right steps. I think the person probably with the most client services experience. So if you think traditionally about advertising, it's primarily, there's the creative side and the account side. This is sort of like think about Mad Men, that's sort of like the main dichotomy. It gets more complicated, but that's the basic breakdown. From the client services side, what you're doing is you're engaging with your client and trying to really understand their needs, what it is that they want to accomplish, and figuring out how you can leverage the resources of the agency in order to not only achieve their goals, but if possible, knock them out of the ballpark. And you want to keep everybody happy. You want to keep your team happy, you want to keep the client happy, and you want to make sure that budgets and timelines are also happening, okay? If you want to be getting experience in that regard, there's a lot of ways to do that. I'm sure most of you guys are active on campus, and that's some of the best experience. I mentioned that I have a degree in music. Critical thinking is huge in business. You've got to have that. Good communication skills are great. You're going to get that if you get a degree from the University of Chicago. But make sure you're active in organizations. Take on leadership roles. Sending out emails to your club telling them what the next step on a project is are really going to set you up for a role in client service. Just life in general, I would argue. And if you do that, you're going to find yourself working your way up through the ad agency, starting maybe in more of a junior account executive or traffic role, where you're really kind of putting the pedal to the metal and making these projects implement and run. And as you gain more experience, you'll begin to have a more strategic or oversight role in the process, and can kind of take it from there. I think that probably covers it from the account side.
Yeah, I think that when people think of going into advertising, oftentimes they think of making advertising work. That's their first point of contact. That's what they know about the advertising industry, but there's so much more to it than that. And it's so complex, I can't even kind of begin to scratch the surface of how many roles it takes to get that work out into the world. From my point of view, I spent nearly 10 years as a copywriter, so making that work. So having taken this turn in my career, now all of a sudden I realize what a massive infrastructure it takes just internally in this company to enable people to do those jobs. So having a really great internal communications team, so you have a really great line of communication from your leadership. Having people like me and people in great HR people who are dedicated to thinking about the ways that we work together and what are our policies, and this is an area that I never even thought about for myself. So it's just something to always remember, is that there's so many different kinds of ways to get into this business. It's very complex. So just keep looking.
So we talked about creative account services. I can speak a little bit to media strategy and what I experienced on the client side, and Ken will have way more to add on that. So I started off at the agency working in, as I mentioned, customer intelligence, which is part of the strategic function. If you want to get into strategy, and I think it might be a natural fit for liberal arts graduates, I think there are a couple of different tracks. There are some people who focus on data and just thinking about the rise of digital, mobile, social media. The way that you figure out what's working and what isn't is by looking at that digital data, analyzing it, figuring out what's working, what engagement, what the quality of engagement is. So there's like a whole side of it that's focused on like digital analytics. But then when you think about other specialties within marketing and advertising, there's shopper marketing. So imagine analyzing sales data from a retailer that can generate insight on how you might want to promote certain products or how you might want to lay out the store. And then there's also traditional brand planning. So these are folks who work side by side with the creatives and the account folks. You try to figure out who the consumer is, what's the cultural zeitgeist, how do you insert the brand so that you're relevant and differentiated from other brands. Requires a good mix of critical thinking, research skill, and just good consumer gut. And I think a lot of it also requires understanding kind of like emotions and psychology and stuff like that too. That's a really traditional strategist role within the advertising arena, and I think there are many more specialties that have arisen since then. And then one other side that I can talk to you about within strategy is research. So there are market research positions. Sometimes that's located within the client side. Other times you might be working within a standalone independent research shop that works directly with brands as well as ad agencies. So that's one other area to think about as well. When I was working on the client side, I worked in a marketing insights group, and a lot of that was a mix of both the quant as well as the qualitative research. And a lot of it was focused on understanding young beer drinkers. What matters to young beer drinkers today, which is a really big question, but that was kind of the holy grail that we were trying to figure out. Like, how do we make Miller Lite and Coors Light really relevant to people today? And as you can imagine, those brands are kind of struggling because of the rise of craft beers and spirits. A lot of people are surprised to think that 10 years ago, your average 22-year-old didn't drink whiskey or didn't drink red wine. But I think for those of you who are above the age of 21, many of you are well-versed in beer as well as other, or no, you're not 21. Are you guys 21? No, you guys are younger than 21. But when you reach that age, you are likely to dabble in more than just beer, which is a big marketing challenge. So, talked a little bit about strategy as well as client-side insights work. The last thing that I can touch on is media. So when you have a great creative campaign, you got the strategy locked down, you know who you want to reach. The challenge is, how do you reach these people? And if you work at a media agency or if you're a media planner, your job is to take that huge media budget and figure out how to invest it. Do you spend more on TV or do you spend more on signage within retail? Maybe you focus more on mobile. So there are many different media opportunities, and it's really all about trying to reach that key audience, optimizing that spend, and really driving impact so that people understand what your brand is all about and what you're trying to convey. So I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you. Those were all great. So I'll speak more from the client side. And I'm going to back up quite a bit. And first of all, from the client side and from a practitioner's perspective, let me first define marketing for you. Okay, it's only 7 words, so you should be able to write it down. Okay, marketing is the process to create and retain customers. Okay, the process to create and retain customers. Customer creation and retention is how you generate demand and therefore revenue. Okay, that process is going to be very different based on your industry and your target consumers. Okay, much of the panelists today here is more on the business to consumer or B2C marketing, but there's this whole world of business to business marketing. Okay, so based on your industry, that process of customer creation and retention is going to be very different. Advertising and digital marketing is one of those processes, and it's absolutely, communicating to your target customer is absolutely vital function. And there are agencies that specialize in nothing but B2B. There are agencies that specialize in nothing but business to government market. I mean, government is a huge purchaser of goods and services in this country. Okay? So there are all kinds of ways to be a marketer. But on the client side, you as a marketer's role is to understand what your job is in that process of customer creation. So when Michael was on the insight side, that was more about understanding the customer's desires and behaviors, and sometimes there's not a direct link between what they tell you what they're interested in and how they actually behave. Okay, that's why we have people who say they're interested in nutrition and health and they're obese. Okay, now to make sense out of that and then help the business planners, the agency, and the communicators to use those ideas and put it into relevant communication to the target. So on the client side, it's really understanding how your organization, whether it's a not-for-profit or for-profit or government, how do you create customers and what is your role in that customer creation?
I hope that gave you a little bit of an overview and some of the different roles that you can take on in this enormous field called advertising and digital marketing. I would actually like Michael and Ken, who've both had experience client side and agency side, to talk about some of the advantages and disadvantages of choosing to work on a client side versus choosing to work for an agency.
Do you want to start? Go ahead. Okay. So agency life, I think there are many pros to agency life. You will be definitely working with very interesting people from all sorts of backgrounds, all sorts of educations. And, you know, there's a lot of energy on the agency side too. Like, I'm really glad that I had a chance to work there towards the beginning of my career. Laid a really great foundation for agile thinking. I'll say agile thinking because you are often thrown many different challenges, and it's up to you and your team to kind of figure it out. How do you use your agency's resources to figure out a creative solution to address that business challenge? And maybe a couple of months you'll be working on telecom, and then maybe shortly after that you'll switch into retail or beverages. So it requires quick study of different categories, understanding how best to address those business challenges within that context, and then making it happen. Talking about some of the challenges of agency life, it was that I didn't really have a lot of direction. I think training in general on the agency side maybe isn't as strong as it is in other business fields. I think it's gotten better in recent years, but oftentimes they would just kind of throw something to you and you had to figure it out, and not having a lot of experience at first, it was kind of stressful. Sometimes it required staying at the office really late. But, you know, coming out of U of C, I was very used to staying up really late to finish assignments, so it wasn't that big of a deal. But, you know, work-life balance is a constant struggle. You have to define your boundaries. You have to learn how to work quickly. And sometimes if you kind of lose sight of how to define those boundaries, your personal time gets sacrificed. So that's kind of like my quick rundown of the agency side. On the client side, I was only there for 2 years, so I don't have like super deep experience on the client side. But one thing that I loved about the client side was that there was a lot of money. Like, if we wanted to answer a question, they just gave you money and you can go ahead and commission a research project and figure it out. It's a very resource-heavy environment, at least in my experience. There was no shortage of training. For some reason, even though I was in the market research side, I found myself like in a brewery learning how to brew beer, which is not something that I would ever do as part of my day job. But they really enjoyed getting us to understand the product, have an appreciation for how beer is brewed. And, you know, that was really fun to have those like different immersive experiences for the purposes of training. One thing that I found kind of challenging about the client side was that I was working in a huge organization, and I came in like wanting to make an impact, but when you have a huge organization to work with, it really emphasizes the importance of learning how to influence people and learning how to be patient, because sometimes, you know, I found myself faced with this environment where it was like, do as you're told, like, do this project, finish it, and sometimes I didn't really feel the business impact of it. So I found myself feeling as if I was in more of a bureaucratic environment, and at times it felt kind of stale compared to agency life. But again, for each like marketing space you're in, there are pros and cons, and I found value of working on both the agency and client sides. Like, having experience in both spaces really did broaden my perspective.
Boy, as one of those who was running the bureaucracy, boy, that stings. No, but all those points are very valid. So most of my experience has been on the client side, and what I enjoyed was you're really working on one business. And I was a sort that the 2 years I served on the agency side, since I was a practice head, I had quite a few clients under me with my people. You know, within a day I could be talking about this category and that category and this category. That wasn't quite my cup of tea. When I worked at Kellogg's, when I worked at Inland Steel, when I worked at McDonald's, I only worried about one brand. And it takes the whole company to make that brand successful. So I enjoyed the aspect of not just being a marketer, but working with the manufacturing people, working with the R&D people, working with the sales people. So So that was the variety that I enjoyed, working cross-functionally with other parts of the company to make our business successful. Even at a place like CTA, it's probably the most business-like government agency because, we actually charge for our services, right? So it's like a retail business. We're trying to drive traffic to our buses and trains, and it takes the entire agency to make it work. So I enjoyed that cross-functional element and really understanding how an organization works. The frustration, of course, is I tended to work with very old organizations. So to Michael's point, there are a lot of legacy effects. It's hard to turn those ships around, and there are certain what's considered to be inalienable truth in these organizations that are no longer true. But we cling to it. That organizational mindset starts to seep into you. And sometimes it can be very frustrating to try to turn that around.
Thank you. What are some of the best ways you would suggest students approach this field and gain the right kind of experience that they can sell themselves for a job in the field of advertising and digital marketing? Gabe, you want to start us off with that?
Yeah, sure. So as part of my role, I actually developed a workshop about building your personal brand. And if this is not a concept that's familiar to you guys, I would say it's something you should definitely be looking into. And really what that means is you're at an age and you're at a university that affords you lots and lots of opportunities to become a really interesting person. And if you seize those opportunities, and especially the ones that you really feel passionately about, you can start to build your story and start to be conscious and intentional about the way that you tell it. Because one thing that I do see in our industry that I'm not a fan of is that sometimes our talent people will go looking for a kind of cookie cutter type resume. So they might, say that they want a copywriter, and they might go specifically for somebody who comes from Miami Portfolio School, where, for my purposes, well, that person has a very straightforward, education in advertising, but really, this type of writing that I need this person to do, I need them to kind of have like an anthropologist mindset. I need them to be curious. I need them to know how to, dig and uncover new types of information, and I need them to know how to write long form. So, many of you guys can do that already. The person who has the better looking, resume isn't necessarily the best one for the job. So learning how to tell your stories, be interesting. UFC is great at connecting you with us. You're obviously, this is the right place for you. You're already networking. Obviously, that's what you're doing right now. One thing that was really helpful for me when I was coming up was the alumni network. I don't know if people realize what a treasure that is. There are some really prestigious people on that list, and most all of them have given their information because they want to talk to you. They'll be very generous with their time. And the other thing to remember is not to make it a one and done type thing. You can nurture a relationship with these people and they can help you. And if you want to develop a mentor relationship, you can do that as well. So that's it from me.
Anyone have any other pieces? Yeah?
Yeah, I'd love to jump in and really kind of speak to that. If you think about yourself as a product that you're selling when you go into an interview or you send your resume out, you should really think about, what are the features of your product? Who are you? And don't feel that you have to shoehorn yourself to fit some kind of cookie cutter. You should be thinking about really realistically, what are your features? What are your best features? How do you package those together in a way that is going to be appealing to your customer, the people who are making hiring decisions, and really build a compelling story for yourself? And Ken spoke to this when he mentioned it's not just consumer. People sell things besides beer and potato chips. There are ads and sales promotions and things going on that you have never seen in your life, didn't even know they existed, you couldn't even guess that they're there. The industry I work in is specifically healthcare focused. So the vast majority of the communications we do are geared to physicians. And unless somebody here has an MD, you've probably never seen those. And so if you're really interested in health, for example, and maybe you thought about being pre-med and decided maybe not there, maybe something like healthcare marketing could combine those two things for you. Maybe you're really interested in chemistry or in structural design, and maybe marketing is also interesting. So that, experience you have or that passion could really take you in the direction of, something like Inland Steel kind of tangentially did for you. And Michael, maybe you want to speak to how much you love data, which I also love, and kind of how you found your way through there. But the point is figure out legitimately what you're passionate about. You don't have to choose one thing. You can be a complex, complete package, and as long as you can tell that story and find the niche that's relevant, it's out there. It's absolutely out there. I had a degree in music, and it turned out that being able to write about something esoteric and something artistic in a way that is persuasive and compelling, and has a scientific basis behind it, that turns out that works out really well for client service. Nobody in CAPS knew that, and it was not something I knew going in, but it turned out to be incredibly useful. And I bet you have skill sets and experiences that would pay off if you just have the right context to put them in. And going back to your point about the alumni network, that's something we can help you with.
And as a creative director, I want to add that the expectation if you go into creative is that you're going to have a portfolio. And it's going to be hard if your portfolio isn't traditional to get beyond the talent managers, which is what they call creative HR people. But you can network through the university and other connections to find someone who's going to respond to maybe a slightly more quirky portfolio. I will tell you, I didn't go to ad school. I didn't get any official ad training at the University of Chicago, and CAPS was 3 binders when I graduated in 1998. They certainly didn't know anything about advertising, but I went and worked for an alternative news weekly, throwing parties at nightclubs and creating events and sponsoring fair, like the Printers Row Book Fair, and all of those things. I had to create print ads and mailers and email marketing, and I packaged that stuff up into a portfolio and got my job at an agency that way. So I would also say that this is the one field where you shouldn't write, a traditional cover letter on creamy stationery and send it in with a boring resume. Get creative. Figure out who you need to get your information in front of and sell yourself in a more unexpected way. Whether it's taking Scrabble tiles to show that you're a wordsmith or, creating something that's graphically super appealing, you'll stand out and, again, sell that personal brand in a way that shows that you're creative.
I'd like to add on to that. So you guys are second years, mostly, I believe. You guys have time. So if you are even remotely interested on the creative side, commit yourself to taking a poetry class, or, take a class with the art studio and do sculpture. But, if there isn't like an arts track at the U of C, and I think there is now, if you wait too long to kind of exercise that creative muscle, I think it does get more challenging to kind of take that leap and really pursue the creative side. One other area that I also want to bring up is design. I think design thinking is beginning to permeate, the marketing and advertising field. So picking up basic design skills, I think, is a great idea. And then lastly, coding skill. I think that, people who come from computer science backgrounds may not have considered marketing or advertising as a viable career path, but given the rise of digital, I think that's a really sensible path for a lot of people who have that, who have that talent with computers and coding. So, and there are various different outlets, even outside of the U of C, where you can explore that. Various different startup incubators or, certificate programs where you can pick up that skill.
Yeah, I'll speak more from the client side, but I'll add one thing about, there's another category of agencies that are totally focused on market research and consumer insights. And the rising digital technology to really understand consumer behavior. But there are also the qualitative firms that do ethnographic studies. There are great firms in Chicago such as Gravity Tank that does a lot of great ethnographic studies. And, they don't really need business majors, okay? There are a lot of businesses out there that says, we require a degree in business administration or marketing and so forth. Don't even try to compete with them. Okay, because if so, you should have gone to those schools. You didn't. You chose U of C. Okay, you got to leverage the UFC strength. Earlier, Gabe said, curiosity is vital, and I totally endorse that. There are two traits that are important for a client-side marketer, and one would be curiosity, and the other one would be discipline. Okay, you got to still understand what the business objective is, but you got to be curious. Now, curiosity means that you don't know everything, right? Otherwise, you won't be curious. So you got to have that sense of humility, so that UFC's strength of inquiry. That we don't know everything. There's a lot we don't know about. So you can demonstrate your ability to inquire, and then take that, hypothesis or whatever we were able to confirm, apply it to some sort of a business practice that will, bear the positive results. So those are the skills that you want to show. That's where I think, I'm amazed with people who can't write very well. What I look for in my staff is, can they communicate well? Do they have the analytical thinking? With the rise of digital marketing, your statistical thinking, ability to make sense out of data, but turning that data into storytelling is where the biggest difference is going to be. And those are the type of skills that I would encourage you to think about.
I can't emphasize enough that your strength in being able to write is probably the greatest thing that I got from the University of Chicago, being able to write, to articulate, to defend my ideas. And I also think that the touch of weirdness that's at the University of Chicago, I trust it hasn't entirely gone away, is a huge advantage in the agency world, because we don't want to hire boring khaki pants wearing Joes. Like, those are our clients a lot of the time. We want the weird, the freaky, the people who make monster movies in their spare time and, run. I personally play roller derby. If you've got a weird hobby and passion, agencies love that. They want people who DJ at night. They want people who, have a fashion blog. And, I have 2 street style fashion bloggers who work for me. Because those sort of passion areas can overlap with client interests. Because if you've got, a street style blog and we've got beauty brands that need to have some cred, well, that's going to be super helpful to know, what the Instagrammers are talking about. Yeah. Anything else before we move on?
Yeah, I think, being this nonconformist, right? The word innovation has become a word that everybody uses. Okay? Every business is innovative. We do innovative. It's like, come on, okay? And I'm more on the hiring side. Tons of resume, innovative marketer. That's their starting point on their summary. It's cheapened it, okay? It's difficult to innovate. Very, very difficult. Only a few people has actually innovated, okay? And it's not easy to be a nonconformist, okay? Go to a place like UFC is an act of conformism, isn't it? Everybody's attracted to that brand of UFC. Any of you know the nonconformist oath?
Did we agree on one?
We should recite it, okay? Let them hear you outside, okay? I will be different. Come on. I will be different. Let them hear you outside. I will be unique.
I will be unique.
I will not repeat things other people say. Okay? It's very difficult. And I'm not, criticizing conformists. If we were a bunch of nonconformists doesn't necessarily mean it's good either. Okay? Osama bin Laden was a nonconformist. Okay? But it's difficult to innovate. So we got to approach this with a sense of humility. Okay, that we don't know everything, that it's difficult. And that's why it's worth doing it.
So, in spite of the pool tables and parties, and if you're ever curious, Google Leo Burnett Breakfast. It starts at 10 a.m. with a show and moves to Castle or another nightclub at noon for another 7 hours of drinking and celebrities. It's a party. It can be a party working at an ad agency. And we have, famous bands stopping in because they're hoping that we're going to pick their songs for a future commercial. We've got artists coming in to share their latest work, fashion designers. It's a very great place to be stimulated by creativity, However, there are disadvantages, and I'm hoping that everyone on the panel can tell you some of the dark side of advertising and marketing. My personal dark side is that I'm a working mom. I have 2 elementary school-aged kids, and while ad agencies are hiring men and women in equal numbers for entry-level creative positions, by the time you get to the level of creative director, it's only 11% women. And probably more than half of those women remain childless because it's not an easy job to find work-life balance. Clients don't particularly care if your kid has a piano recital when you're doing a photo shoot across the country, and you're a passionate creative director, you don't want to miss your photo shoot halfway across the country. So there are definite challenges. I'm trying to address some of those challenges at Leo Burnett. I'm one of the founding members of the Parent Kind support group. It's basically a working parents employee resource group for men and women with children, and trying to make Leo Burnett the agency of choice for working parents. And we have our People and Culture, which is our HR group. We've lobbied them for benefits, we've lobbied them for advocacy, but there's a lot of cultural baggage around being an ad agency that's focused on creativity above all else, and on service. And sometimes that comes into conflict with work-life balance and some of the demands of being a working mom. So that's my dark side.
I think that everything that she said about working in an ad agency is absolutely true. It is so thrilling. It's exhilarating. It's kind of like a drug. If you want to go in and do the exact same thing every single day and know exactly how long your lunch hour is going to be and when you're going to go home, and it'll be in time to beat traffic, you probably don't want to work in an ad agency. But if you want to be passionate about a project and put everything into it, and maybe even work kind of crazy hours sometimes, and then be able to have that amazing feeling of accomplishing something. And you don't have to be a creative to have a sense of ownership and input into a project, and ultimately be able to look at something and say, I was a part of that. And sometimes these creative projects are things that can change the world and change culture in very meaningful ways, and that's exciting. The downside is it can take over your life, and not just because you have to be there, but because you love it. And so those things that make you interesting and appealing to get hired in the first place, your fashion blog, roller derby, amateur competitive barista, whatever it is that you're passionate about, you have to carve time out. And you have to make time to stay interesting, to stay well-read, to stay up to date. And I think that probably goes for any career, but particularly one that's as exciting and fascinating and time-consuming as advertising.
So mine is related to Alma's. Our industry has a serious diversity gap. We have a real problem. We are behind almost every other industry. It's kind of embarrassing how much of a boys' club advertising in particular can be to this day in 2015. And for me, there's a business reason why that's a problem. There's a moral reason too, but there's a business reason. When you've got thinking that you call, pale, male, and stale, right? A lot of old white guys in a room making the same kind of work, it's not going to be as relevant, right, to our consumers. And as, millennials, which all of you are, it's a very complex group of people. They're a very, very complex demographic. How are we going to make work that resonates? How are we going to create an emotional connection to a brand if we have the same kind of people making the same kind of ideas in the idea room, in the brainstorm every time? It's just not going to make for good work. But with regard to culture, in my job, I also think of what we do as an agency as making culture, right? So we are actually producers of culture, and advertising permeates all of our experiences every day. So if we're not being thoughtful and intentional about the messages that we're putting out into the world, if we're not embracing divergent thinking, if we're not looking at different perspectives, different backgrounds, different genders, different sexual orientations, if we're not doing any of that, then we're not putting responsible work into the world.
Agreed.
I'll add on to that. I think that, like every other business field, relationships are so important. And for that reason, I mean, my observation is that a lot of agencies gravitate towards certain alumni from certain schools. There are a couple of agencies that are very U of C friendly. Abelson Taylor, I don't know what else. So,
there should be one more.
FCB and any agency that has an analytics group, I think that they kind of think, oh, U of C and econ, let's talk to them. But I think that it's sometimes difficult to navigate those biases. Like, I know that U of C students are just as creative as students from University of Missouri, Columbia, and Northwestern, but for some reason, I just see tons of students from those schools getting jobs at agencies in Chicago. So just being aware of some of those hurdles, like if you don't have an in for a certain agency, it does make it difficult to get in. So networking is really important. Don't be too shy to network. Don't be afraid to network with people who are very different from you. I think that's a lesson that I learned very early on. I kind of gravitated towards, more reserved, mild-mannered people, and I kind of hung with that group, and I always kind of didn't hang out with the beer guys. The beer accounts at agencies, I think, tend to be male-dominated, sports-loving types of people, and that's not my scene. But I later found out that people who are very different from you can be your strongest allies, and they can push your thinking in very interesting ways. So navigating relationships, I think, is something that's very important. It's not something that I learned when I was in school.
I'll make a couple of observations about agency as I see it from the client side. One is the times when I sit there and interact with my agency partners, and I'm sitting there thinking, I can't believe they're putting up with this from me. And that is, you're constantly being told no. Okay? Your job is to pitch ideas, campaign ideas, okay, all kinds of ideas. And the client's not always going to say yes. And a lot of times you're being told no. And those are the ideas that made it to the client. Okay? The internal, this creative director is going to say no to you. A lot. Okay? The account people, the strategists are going to say that's not on brief. Okay? There's a lot of pushback. So if you have a hard time taking criticism, it's probably not an industry for you. You can't be thin-skinned. Okay, you got to have a rubber ass and a steel jaw. Okay, because you can be kicked and punched all the time. Okay, now, from the client side, the lessons I've learned is that when you haven't bought into the idea, don't say yes just to be nice. Okay, after all, we're here to do a job. Okay, but you have to be a good client. A good client is both fair and tough. And tough doesn't mean to be mean or a jerk. Tough means you're pushing the agency to come up with better and better ideas. So the discourse has to be about the idea. Okay? And you got to send this team back. You just said no to their campaign idea to come back with a better idea after you've just stomped on their ego. Okay? So you got to understand about relationships and trust building. Okay, and let them fight for their ideas. Okay, listen to them. So that's one observation. It's a tough business to be in. Okay, you can't be thin-skinned. The other is more of a criticism of the ad agency, and I think you've all brought it up. This lack of diversity is just an example of that, and that is a lot of agencies don't practice what they preach to their clients. Okay, they get in front of clients and say, this is where the world is going, you got to be doing this, you got to change your culture. And you ask them, okay, what have you done about that stuff internally in your agency? And they are stumped. Okay, and I think a lot of that is because of this hyper busyness that the agency is constantly in. Constantly, deadline driven, constant. And they're just like, well, when are we going to actually practice the stuff we preach ourselves? So I don't want to be like these are bad people or these are incompetent people. The structure of the agency industry makes it really challenging to actually practice what they preach. So you have to have a tolerance. I don't want to say tolerance like put up with it, but understand that it's there.
Thank you. So we may have sort of touched on this. Gabe mentioned it's important to have diversity because we have a diverse group of millennials. I'm always talking about the importance of having, not losing the women in the creative director roles, because women make 95% of purchase decisions, and actually women rule purchase decisions in all but 2 categories in the United States. One of them is hard liquor, and the other one, I believe, is electronics. Or maybe music downloads might be in there too. But I was wondering if we could spend a little bit more time on diversity in the workplace, either at your current or previous workplaces, and what you think your company's doing to improve it. You want to start, Gabe, since you're
Sure, yeah. It's actually part of my job now, which is really great for me. It's something, obviously, I'm very passionate about. I'm a double minority, so it's something that I think about all the time. But, it's true that it is something that I keep saying the word intentional. You have to be intentional about this. You can't just say, wow, look around. This industry needs more diversity. You have to have a plan. You have to have a really well-articulated plan. What are the numbers? Where are we currently at? Where do we need to be? What are the changes that we need to make? So all of this is something that's falling under this new work for me. So doing a lot of, talking to people across the company, where are we seeing those gaps? Why are we seeing those gaps? Is there something cultural externally that's happening? How do we address that? What can we do when we're recruiting? Where can we look in different types of places? Can we make different types of relationships? Why aren't we at the U of C campus, which is a pretty diverse campus? All these kinds of questions that we're asking ourselves. This is something that's very, very important, and I've been really happy to see that it's very important to our CEO. But it's definitely something that you have to have a plan, you have to articulate it, and you have to really commit to it. And publicly, I think it's important.
What's Abelson Taylor doing?
I don't make a lot of the hiring decisions from the outside. I do know that we are very dedicated to having diversity, and one of the things, just in terms of what I've observed, is what makes a great first-year employee is not the same thing that makes a great account director or, VP of strategy or creative director. They're 2 different things. And the skills that you learn, the skills that the University of Chicago prioritizes, are the ones that will make you amazing in a more senior role. They're not the ones that are being prioritized, like showing up and having an iron shirt, and we're more focused on bigger ideas than that. But sometimes being able to check the box is what helps people get that first foot in the door or look really fantastic in that kind of entry-level job. And so when you have schools that may have a less diverse background, who are prioritizing looking really, really good at year 1, they may not be preparing people for the stuff that's going to be important years 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It can filter who's going to be maybe looking good in the best in an interview. And that's why the university is making sure that you have events like this to be able to think about the right things, to think about the things that are important to you. That's why CAPS is available. And that's why I would really say, figure out what's important to you, what your brand is, and be able to put that forward in a career setting. And I know that I took so much for granted the amazing diversity of the University of Chicago, and sometimes it's surprising when I don't see that and look around me. And whether it's diversity, racially, in terms of orientation, in terms of where you come from, or just in terms of your other interests, come talk to us. We need more of all of you in the industry.
So I've been at my company for a couple of months now, and it's very different from any other place that I've worked at because it's a sales-driven organization versus a marketing-driven organization. So, with being in a sales-focused company, along with that comes with certain casting of employees. Majority of the people in my office are in the business of wining and dining potential clients, and you can kind of imagine what types of people that attracts. So it's kind of hard for me to see any deliberate philosophy on diversity and inclusion. And, it's one of the things that is pretty important to me. And, I encourage you all to think about what it is that you desire out of your career, what type of environment you want, what are your values? It's kind of a hard question to ask yourself, but as you move along in your career, as you're moving on through school, I think you'll get a pretty good sense of what matters to you. And having that values match between you and your employer is really important in establishing an emotional bond. And in all honesty, right now, I'm still kind of feeling out my new company. I'm still trying to look for cues to see, is this a place that I should be at because of a values match? Without that, I'm not going to probably stick around for too long. I might be looking around pretty soon if I don't sense that match.
I'm glad Michael brought up the issue of values. When you're an entry person just graduating from college trying to land a job, it may be harder to be picky about where you're going to go work. But as you start your career, keep your radars up to really find companies that seem to be walking their talk. And then after you've got some experience under your belt, target those companies, network into those companies and say, I want to join this company because their values match me and they seem to, really work hard at exercising it. No company's going to be perfect wherever you go. If you have 3 people, there's going to be politics. Okay, it's just a human condition that it wasn't invented by the current generation. So it will always be there. But, always look around and say, where are the organizations that really seem to be striving to live up to a certain authentic set of values, and target those companies and work your way into it. And once you do it, stay there as long as you can.
Before we move into the Q&A, let's ask some of our panelists what kinds of internships and work experiences that students should be seeking out if they're interested in going into advertising and digital marketing. Do they need to be marketing specific, or are there experiences in other industries that are valuable?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I was just thinking about the externship that Joseph here was a part of at Sapient, which was a really successful program. I don't know if any of you have done that. I believe it's a 1 to 5 day program. We did a whole week kind of boot camp with some U of C kids. I think it was a group of 4 or 5. And that was marketing specific. But one of the coolest things about that, and getting to work really closely with these guys from, a brief to an end project where they actually presented to 100 of our people, was that we got to learn a lot about them and their interests. And because there isn't a marketing major here, it's not like anybody had, the straight kind of marketing experience. But what they did have was, things like we had a young woman who came from Iowa, and she was raised on a farm, and she was going to go study drone technology in agriculture for the summer. How cool is that? We're a technology company. We also, we're trying to bring storytelling and technology together. Of course, that experience would be of huge interest to us. So, yeah, absolutely, there are plenty of things that you can do.
I would just say, if you're interested or even curious about marketing, there's a marketing club. Join it. You'll learn a lot of whatever questions you have, you'll have an opportunity to get them answered. You'll be able to connect with people who are passionate, both current students and alums or professors. The other thing is you may already be active in organizations that need to recruit people. One of the things that I did that helped me learn how much I cared about advertising was I did the promotions for the fencing team. So the posters that go up around campus, somebody's got to design them. Why not have it be you?
I totally echo that. Whether it's a local business or an organization or an NGO or a nonprofit that you can help promote, it doesn't have to be a flyer or a print ad. Perhaps you design their website, or you come up with a strategy for their email marketing campaign, or you get them involved in social media and you become their content manager for their social media account. There are so many ways to bring really valuable creative experiences that let you kind of understand how to solve someone's problems in a creative way.
I think anything related to products, media, people is all fair game. Once I interviewed a candidate who was working at Best Buy for 2 or 3 years, and during the interview, he really minimized it. I think there was some kind of stigma about working in retail. But at the time, I was working on the Motorola account, and it was all focused on consumer electronics. So even though he kind of, avoided talking about that section of his resume, I wanted to talk about it. We talked about it for about 15 minutes, and he had some great insight about the challenges of selling consumer electronics, and he advanced to the next round. So that's one example of how something that might not seem relevant actually is relevant. Just think about what that linkage is.
I think sometime during your career, by the time most of you are in middle management, I think the word digital marketing would disappear. Okay, I think all marketing would be digital. I think it's a matter of time before TV is going to be strictly broadband streaming, even if it's live. There already is tremendous data available, whether it's B2B or B2C. So the ability to look at the data and discern what's a trend, what's true, and what's noise is going to be a very prized trait. So anything on the analytics side, I would encourage you to think about, if you enjoy that kind of stuff. Okay? There's no stigma in not enjoying that stuff, but that is going to be huge. I think before my career is over, the level of analytics we're going to have is it's already unimaginable compared to when I started. But the level of data gathering on consumer behavior is only going to explode. So anything related to that would be good.
Now it's time for you to ask questions. You can direct your questions specifically to an individual panelist, or we will find someone who can answer your question.
Everybody wants to be the second person to ask the question, it seems like.
All right. I'm not sure personally that I would agree with that definition. I think advertising is a form of marketing, but there's so many kinds of advertising out there.
Yeah, I think there's, in a functional way, you do more design in advertising because, as you say, advertising is a subset. It's a specialization within marketing. So you've got your 4 Ps, one of which is promotion. Advertising is promotion. It's not just ads. It's not just billboards. There's a lot that goes into promotion. That
Price, product, what's the other one?
Placement?
Placement, yes.
Yeah. And and the people, the 4 Ps, they'll come up a million times. But promotion is, I would argue, the most interesting one. Of course, I also work at an ad agency. And it's the one where you get to do a lot of the fun projects, like the videos, whether they're going to be on broadcast TV or on YouTube. And so that's where a lot more of the design or, interaction with the creative product comes in.
Nailed it.
Yeah, I would say creativity over just design, because there's a lot of forms of creativity. Writing and art are a big part of it, but it could also be the fact that, hey, the kids these days are on Yik Yak. How are we going to reach them to get them to buy shampoo at Target?
I'm going to go sign up for Yik Yak.
The best place to use that bilingual background would be in Japan. It is harder to do so here, simply because the Japanese-speaking market within the boundaries of U.S. is relatively small. Very, very small number of Japanese speakers in the United States. So the best place to do that would be to work for a global company's operation in Japan. I have not used my Japanese capability on this side of the shore all that much. I've done some, but it hasn't been the main part of my job. But of course, when I worked in Tokyo on 2 different occasions, every single one of my subordinates were native of Japan. In fact, except for a handful of us expats, everybody was from Japan. All of our customers were Japanese. So, Tokyo is a great place, not just Tokyo. I mean, Kobe has a large expatriate P&G Japan is in Kobe, not in Tokyo. Nestle Japan is in Kobe also, not Tokyo. Google has a large presence in Tokyo now. Facebook Japan is doing gangbusters. So I would try to find an opportunity there.
And I can actually just add a little bit more specifics. I actually do know somebody who, not an alum of the University of Chicago, but a friend of mine actually works at a Japanese ad agency in New York and then was able to switch to their Tokyo location and is doing exactly what you described. And that's specific to, the Japanese language, but there are agencies who specialize in communicating to specific minorities. So if you are, say, Spanish English bilingual, there's plenty of folks who would be very excited to leverage that expertise.
And Michael, you actually got to take your agency job overseas due to your language ability.
So one of the nice things about working for one of the big agencies that have offices all throughout the globe is that occasionally they need help in other parts of the world. So they needed someone in our Brazilian office, and I didn't even tell the agency, but I studied Portuguese at the U of C. So it was a very nice coincidence, and I think it really allowed me to do the work. I think someone who didn't have any awareness of the language would have struggled a little bit more. So, I've heard of people, even at Sapient Nitro, who have gone to other global offices. So that might be one consideration. If you do pursue the agency side, or even the client side, if they do have an international presence, those opportunities are there. Usually it's very, few and far between, or you really have to express up front, like, I want to work internationally, and maybe they'll plant the seed for the opportunity later on.
Mobility is actually a big asset if you guys feel that you are mobile. I was just reading a report from the Boston Consulting Group that North America, we have the lowest rate of people who are willing to move to other countries for their company in the world, oddly. Nobody wants to leave North America. But so if that's something that you're willing to do, you're willing to travel, let recruiters know that up front. That is a major asset.
Yeah, and I know even at Leo Burnett, there's opportunities at Leo Burnett ARC offices around the globe. But it's really hard to get a job in the U.S. because we're sort of the creative lead. It's hard to get a job in Sydney because everyone wants to live there. And it can be challenging to get a job in London, which leads Western Europe. But man, they want people so badly in the Middle East and the Far East that they'll take you even if you don't have the language ability. You had a question back there. Personally, I would say take advantage of the alums and ask them, hey, can you take a look at my portfolio? I'm just looking for feedback. I'm not asking you for a job. I've definitely given people feedback on their portfolios, and I would volunteer to do that again.
That's a pleasure, actually. It's really flattering to be asked, and it's fun to kind of be in that teacher-mentor position. And I'm not sure if you're talking specifically about creative portfolios or if you're talking about just your resume, like what... Creative portfolios, yeah. There are also digital tools for doing that. There are communities online. There's Behance. Behance actually has a quarterly series that they do where you can go to agencies, and I know this because Sapient hosted one last quarter. And you and a bunch of other people can take your portfolios and shop them around and do kind of a quick fire portfolio review with professionals in the industry. So that's a cool opportunity in this city.
And I feel a little bit conflicted about mentioning some of the companies like Creative Circle that sort of represent freelance art and copywriters because I don't think that they treat them super awesome. But it can be a good way to build your portfolio and get in front of a lot of different creative directors. If you don't have a job at an agency and you really want one, and you can get yourself represented by one of the freelance creative agencies. It's a step up from regular temping.
AIGA actually is another one that you could be looking at too. It's another association in the city that has a lot of meetups, and they'll be honest with you.
There's actually no stigma against portfolio schools. It is the easiest way to get hired in an agency. The vast majority of the creatives that we've hired, if they haven't come straight out of an ad program, have come out of a portfolio school. So the only stigma is that it's going to cost you a lot of money. And if you can avoid it, that's going to save you a lot of money. But it is a valuable creative education. I've hired portfolio school graduates. Many of them are very successful. That said, there's also creatives that I think are not very good at their jobs, and they teach at the portfolio school. So,
the best thing that you can do is find, if you're a writer, find a designer. If you're a designer, find a writer. Form an idea together. When you pitch that idea to your writer or visual designer partner, just be really excited about it. Hey, this awesome soap flakes product, I've got this great idea. We can shoot it with Vin Diesel, and we'll make an app. Just be really excited about it, and make that work together. Try to develop a relationship, and you can make a portfolio on your own. You can. It's not as easy, but you do have resources. You have the Mark on campus. You have us. You have bands. There are ways to do it. It is harder, but you can do it and save yourself $20,000.
I'll take a stab at that. The research process is less rigorous and it's faster, but not less rigorous in a bad way. Sometimes you just don't really have to go that deep to get your answer. There are also many different avenues for answering a question. Sometimes you can just look to data, analyze it, and triangulate that with secondary research and have a point of view, and oftentimes that's good enough to start from. Other times, when you have a big research question like, how are millennials using smartphones? It's really big. And sometimes, you have to package it up for people who are a little bit older, from the older generation who are in those business decision-making positions. That's when you do stuff like, ethnographies and other types of qualitative research. Sometimes you have the opportunity to do that within an ad agency, but oftentimes a lot of those questions come directly from the client side, and they will usually partner with an outside research company that specializes in consumer research.
From the ad agency side, I actually do a lot of market research that we handle in-house, and I can say that, compared to something academic, what we do is very scrappy. Even potentially a client-side market research study is not going to be the same level of rigor as like a academic experiment. But part of that is really exciting. It's what do I need to test in order to accomplish something? It's not an academic question, literally. It's a very functional question. And then whatever your cycle is, 3 months, a year, whatever, you actually get to see the fruits of that. And then maybe do the research again, see how things are evolved, and iterate from there. We also do a lot of ad testing or creative testing, concept testing, to be able to understand how the ideas that we're passionate about, how well the consumers think they do, so we can take them to our client, and when he wants to say no, we can tell them that the consumers like it and maybe the idea lives.
And the research that I find the most compelling as a creative tends to be sometimes a little bit more shallow, but it's uncovering insights. Insights drive the creative process and really sort of inform all the work that we do, but they can be hard to uncover, and yet they can also be easy to uncover. And there can be so many different ways, whether it's getting a group of people in a room to talk about, what they buy. We had a challenge. P&G makes Pampers, and people register for Pampers on their Target baby registry, and nobody wants to buy them Pampers. And we needed to find out why that was, because clearly women wanted Pampers to be bought for them for their new babies, and nobody wanted to buy them. So, yeah, you could think about what your own motivation was, and we also talked to men, and we talked to women, and we talked to, all of the people who go to baby showers, and we learned something, which is that if you haven't had a baby yet, and you're going to your friend's baby showers, it seems like a really boring present. And there's a judgment at a baby shower, which is everybody holds up the cute little onesies and the monogrammed burp cloths, and they ooh and they ah, and nobody's going to do that if you bring a box of Pampers. So we needed to find, it was clear, we needed a creative solution that was going to make buying a box of Pampers fun and cute and ooey and ah-y, and we came up with a lot of different ways of doing that. But that was juicy. And another example of a juicy insight was, the problem was we needed to sell more Pantene shampoo at Walgreens. There's lots of ways you could do that, but the insight that we uncovered is that women only change their shampoo, for the most part, when they hate their hair. And once they hate their hair, they blame their product and they want a new product right away. So they're not going to spend a lot of time researching it on Amazon, and they're not going to, go to Sephora and ask a bunch of questions. They tend to go to Walgreens and buy some new shampoo, fix their hair right now. And guess when women hate their hair? When it's humid. So we partnered with the Weather Channel to give people a hair forecast along with their weather forecast, so that when it was going to be 95 degrees and humid in Chicago, it was forecast frizzy. And there was a mobile coupon that drove you directly to Walgreens to get the products that you're going to need to fight frizz. and it lifted sales 20% during the time that it was up. So it really did work too, which they could take back to the client, and they wanted to do it again. So we reprised that program.
I think everything they said is great. And to your point, it has to be faster, it's cheaper, and up front there's a business need that's been specified. We don't do it for the fun of it, right? What business problem are we trying to solve? And it's often related to growing the business. So let's take a well-known sub-brand of McDonald's, Happy Meal. Okay, it's a very important part of the business. We were having a hard time growing the business in Japan. Who makes the purchase decision for Happy Meal on most occasions? Okay, it's not the kid, right? They're the influencer. They cry bloody murder in the car until they're taken to the nearby McDonald's. It's the mothers, usually. Okay, and we know that mothers both love and hate McDonald's. Okay, there's this love-hate relationship with McDonald's. Why do they love us? Why do they hate us? Okay, and what can we do about certain behaviors they have with interfacing with our communication that can, shift the balance a little bit towards the love side? They're always going to hate us. Okay, there's enough communication out there that's telling the world that it's not cool to like McDonald's. Okay, more than enough communication out there, and there's no point fighting it. So what we found out in Japan was that, and by the way, I'll be the first to say, a lot of things in marketing happen because of an accident. Okay, not because it was brilliant or intentional. All Happy Meal ads in Japan start off with a little Happy Meal jingle. Okay, the ad always starts with it. Okay, if an agency brought back a creative idea without that jingle, they'd be slaughtered. Okay, it's our way of saying Happy Meal ad starting. Pay attention to the TV. Okay, who do we do it for? We do it for the kids. Okay, so the kids know what the toys are. It's about the toy. It's about nothing else. It's about the toy. And about the fries, we also found out. We found out that it wasn't just the kids who paid attention to the TV as soon as they heard the jingle. Moms were like, they hear the jingle, they look at the TV. Okay? Why did they do that? It's a gatekeeping behavior. They wanted to know if the kid already has this toy so that she can say, no, we're not going. You already have Pokemon. Okay. So it's this whole defensive mechanism about the kid's going to beg for it. I've got to protect myself. Okay, because mother-child, and you would know, are in constant battle. Okay, it's a contentious, loving relationship, but nevertheless, it's contentious. Okay, and there's nothing more contentious than a meal occasion. It seems like. I found that at the Kellogg Company too. They're always fighting over meals. So we found out that, okay, so we're triggering gatekeeping behavior. Well, that's when you got to innovate. It's like, oh my gosh, what have we done to ourselves? We're like triggering gatekeeping. Then, one, of course, the good ideas always come from the younger, junior people. One said, when is it ever bad when they pay attention to your ad? Right? Because we were like, oh gosh, this is depressing. They're watching our ad. Okay. Then we realized, like, are we idiots? This is great. They're watching our ad. Okay. So what can we do in that short advertising that's something for the mom, even though it's really about the kid? Okay. Most advertisers will tell you should only have one clear target in a campaign, not many targets. Then we came up with the dual target campaign, in which we would embed certain, what we would call magic moments in our Happy Meal ad that depicted the child in the most endearing way. To let the moms know that, yes, you're constantly fighting with your kid. Sometimes you want to kill them, but they are the most precious thing in your life. Okay. So, that's the kind of insight that these research can come bring us.
I have one last thing to mention on the research front, and it's a book recommendation. It's called Just Enough Research, and I think it's by Erica Hall, I think is her name, but she comes from a design background. And the book speaks more to product design, digital design, but it's a really good overview of different research methods. I think it kind of represents this new attitude about market research. Like, it's no longer really about focus groups. Focus groups have their place, but sometimes all you need to do is just enough research by observing consumers, interviewing them one-on-one and understanding how they behave with certain things to generate enough insight so you can make strategic decisions. It's a pretty quick read.
If any of this sounds fascinating to any of you, just a quick plug, we hire research interns on the regular. So if it's something that you're interested in, just go ahead and email me.
I think we're out of time, but some of us can stick around for a few minutes if you have any more questions. Thank you so much for coming.